But first, the French President Emmanuel Macron is gearing up to host the Prime Ministers of Denmark and Greenland for lunch at the Elysee Palace. The gathering comes in the wake of recent tensions with the United States over Donald Trump's insistence on taking control of the autonomous territory for national security purposes. Now, after a meeting last week in Davos with NATO Secretary General, Donald Trump signaled a compromise had been found over Greenland. However, details remain scant. For more on this story, we can bring in Ian Lesser, Senior Director for Foreign and Security Policy at the German Marshall Fund. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us on the program today. What do you think Emmanuel Macron is trying to prove with this meeting?
I think the meeting has a number of purposes. First, as you suggested, first of all, to understand what might be the nature of this framework agreement that was worked out on the margins of Davos. It's really unclear what this might imply in terms of security or in terms of American rights to invest in Greenland. Just to simply understand what that's all about. I'm sure that President Macron will be interested in that part of it. But then, more fundamentally, it's an opportunity for all sides to continue to demonstrate a sense of political solidarity around this issue, which touches on European sovereignty very closely. So I think it's a combination of symbolism and a good bit of practicality too, probably.
NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, the man handpicked to negotiate this. I mean, he's NATO Secretary General, but how can he negotiate for Denmark or Greenland?
I think that reflects a couple of things. First of all, what seems to be a good working relationship, relatively good working relationship between Secretary General Rutte and President Trump, which can go a long way. But also, a lot of this really is about security, or at least that's what President Trump says. And when it comes to security in the Arctic, NATO obviously is a potentially extremely important actor. So if the U.S. is looking for more reassurance on the security side, the Secretary General of NATO is the person to offer it.
In the aftermath of that meeting with Donald Trump, we had NATO Secretary General who sort of started parroting Washington's lines, saying that Greenland was needed for national security purposes and to fend off the Chinese and the Russians. But it seems that there are some splits emerging within the NATO alliance itself, because just a couple of days ago, we had Mark Rutte who told the Europeans, if you think you can defend yourself without the United States, keep dreaming, to which the French responded that he represents 32 NATO allies, not just one. So it seems that there are some divisions over how NATO approaches Donald Trump's Greenland ambitions.
I think on the question of increased security in the Arctic, there probably isn't much debate. And in fact, there's a lot of scope for the United States and also NATO to do much more. There are no really restrictions on that. If the United States wants to do more, to build additional bases, to have additional deployments there, there's nothing to stop that. And I think that would be well accepted. Also for NATO to do more. Where it gets more controversial, of course, is the question of whether Europe can defend itself without the United States if the United States, in a broader sense, is no longer a predictable ally. That's a very dramatic sort of awakening in Europe, and the sense of risk from that is not equally shared around the alliance. And I think that's sort of what you hear reflected in the Secretary General's comments. The United States, provides things that Europe will not be able to replace for many years to come, even if it spends more and does more.
In the run-up to Davos, Denmark organized military drills in Greenland. France was one of the European countries that sent troops to take part in those exercises. Donald Trump viewed that as some sort of provocation. In the aftermath of those exercises, he threatened to hit France with tariffs. Now those tariffs are off the table. How will he view this meeting in Paris today?
I don't think this is likely to raise many hackles. And I think, frankly, that deployment and the way it was received in Washington, had a good bit of misunderstanding in it. I think it was intended not to deter the United States, except perhaps in a political sense of suggesting that, yes, indeed, America's European allies are capable of doing much more and will do more to defend Greenland and defend the Arctic. And so, you don't need to be quite so aggressive and assertive, President Trump. That was the message that was intended. I think how it was read in Washington was, we're simply not on the same page with you as to the future of Greenland, and we're demonstrating it. So, I think a lot of this has cooled off. I think the president has a lot of other challenges on his plate. There may be more coming this week, and we're getting close to midterm elections in the United States. And I think a lot of leaders in Europe hope that will have a tendency to cool off the Greenland crisis over the next months.
Within the European framework, there also seem to be splits on how, um, for Europe to do more on its own. Emmanuel Macron has been championing this for quite some time, even when it comes to buying European weaponry. I read somewhere that France is not going to be taking part in buying American weapons to send to Ukraine. So that too is going to run counter to what Donald Trump wants.
I think Donald Trump has actually been keen to portray the new defense spending commitments in Europe as something of a political victory. And I think leaders in Europe are happy to hand him that, actually. And to an extent, it is. It's not a new story. And I think the burden sharing, as it's called, issue is in some ways really priced into the relationship at the moment. But the question of, if Europe is going to spend more and do more, will it buy American in the future? This is likely to be very controversial in Washington. And the mood in Europe at the moment is getting much tougher around these issues. It's getting much more serious. Above all, I think Europe wants predictability from the United States on defense, on trade. That's in short supply at the moment.
Yeah, indeed. Ian Lesser, thank you very much for joining us on the program today.